The colony world of Seven had known peace for 3 long years. The purple skies stretched endlessly over gardens filled with strange and beautiful plants. Towers of crystal and living wood rose from the ground, built by an ancient race of beings who had mastered the art of growing their cities rather than building them. In one of these towers, a human man sat at his desk, reading through diplomatic reports. His name was Daniel Cooper, and he was the official ambassador from Earth to the Queendom. He was not a young man anymore. Gray hair had begun to show at his temples, and lines had formed around his eyes from years of smiling and squinting at documents. He was 53 years old, and his body reminded him of that fact every morning when he climbed out of bed. Daniel had not always been a diplomat. In his younger days, he had worked as a teacher on Earth, helping children learn about history and the stars. But when humanity finally reached out into the galaxy and made contact with alien civilizations, everything changed. The governments of Earth needed people who could talk, who could listen, who could build bridges between species that had nothing in common. Daniel had volunteered, and somehow he had ended up here, on a world 17,000 light years from home. They were not easy to understand at first. They looked like giant insects, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with hard exoskeletons that shimmered in shades of green and gold. They had 4 arms and 2 legs, and their heads were crowned with compound eyes that could see in directions humans could not imagine. They communicated through a mix of sounds and chemical signals, though they had learned to speak in ways that human translators could interpret. Queen ruled the queendom from her palace on Seven. She was ancient by human standards, having lived for over 400 years. In that time, she had seen many species come and go. She had watched empires rise and fall. She had learned that the galaxy was a dangerous place, full of predators and conquerors who respected only strength. When the humans arrived, the queen had been curious but cautious. These creatures were so small, so soft, so short-lived. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no telepathy, no remarkable abilities that the queen could see. Their technology was impressive for such a young species, but it was nothing compared to the older civilizations. Most of the galactic powers dismissed humanity as insignificant, a footnote in the great story of the cosmos. But Queen had lived long enough to know that first impressions were often wrong. She watched the human ambassador carefully over the 3 years he spent on her world. She noticed how he treated everyone with respect, from the highest nobles to the lowest workers. She saw how he spent his free time learning the language, not just relying on translators. She observed how he asked questions not to find weaknesses, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. There was something about Daniel Cooper that the Queen could not quite name. A warmth, perhaps, a sincerity that was rare among diplomats of any species. He reminded her of something, though she could not say what. The Queen had a daughter named. She was the youngest of the royal children, barely past her first molt. In human terms, she would be considered about 6 years old, was curious and adventurous, always escaping from her caretakers to explore the vast gardens that surrounded the palace. The guards had grown used to searching for her among the purple ferns and silver flowers. Daniel had met the princess several times during his years on Seven. She was not afraid of him the way some children were afraid of humans. Instead, she seemed fascinated by his soft skin and his strange flat eyes. Once, she had reached out with one of her small arms and touched his hand, and Daniel had smiled at her with such genuine kindness that even the Queen, watching from a distance, had felt something stir in her ancient heart. On the day that everything changed, Daniel was walking through the eastern gardens. The twin suns were beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He had finished his work for the day and wanted to clear his head before dinner. The gardens were peaceful, filled with the sounds of alien birds and the rustle of wind through leaves. He was thinking about his daughter back on Earth. Her name was Sophie, and she was 24 years old now. She had her mother's eyes and his stubborn nature. Daniel missed her terribly. He had not seen her in person for 2 years, though they spoke through subspace communications whenever they could. She was proud of him, she said, proud that her father was out among the stars, representing humanity to alien civilizations. But he knew she also wished he would come home. Daniel was so lost in thought that he almost did not notice when the sky turned red. The first explosion came from the north, a massive fireball that lit up the twilight like a second sun. Daniel stopped walking and stared, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. More explosions followed, one after another, and he could see ships descending through the atmosphere. They were not ships. They were dark and angular, covered in spikes and weapons. They had come. Daniel knew about them from his diplomatic briefings. They were a reptilian species, cold-blooded predators who lived for conquest and hunting. They stood 8 feet tall, with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. They raided colony worlds for resources, for slaves, and for sport. The queendom had been at war with them centuries ago, and though a fragile peace had been established, everyone knew it would not last. Now that peace was shattered. Alarms began to wail across the palace grounds. Daniel could hear shouting in the distance, the sound of weapons fire, the screams of the wounded and dying. He should run to the shelter, he knew. The diplomatic compound had a bunker designed to protect him in exactly this kind of situation. But as he turned to run, he heard a different sound. A small, frightened sound coming from beneath a cluster of purple ferns. Daniel stopped. He pushed aside the fronds and looked down. Princess was there, curled into a ball, her compound eyes wide with terror. She had been exploring the gardens again, and now she was alone, far from the palace, far from her guards, far from her mother. The nearest shelter was 300 meters away. Daniel could already see drop pods landing in the gardens, dark shapes emerging from them with weapons in their clawed hands. He looked at the princess. He looked at the hunters. He thought about the bunker, about safety, about his own life. Then Daniel Cooper, a 53-year-old diplomat with a bad knee and no weapons, bent down and lifted the alien child into his arms. "I have got you," he said softly, even though he knew she could not understand his words. "I have got you, little one. We are going to be okay." He did not believe it, but he said it anyway, because that was what you said to frightened children, no matter what species they were. And then he began to run. Daniel ran through the garden with the princess pressed against his chest. She was lighter than he had expected, her exoskeleton smooth and warm against his arms. Her small limbs wrapped around him the way a human child might cling to a parent, and she made a high keening sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of fear, the sound of a child calling for her mother. His legs burned, his lungs ached, his bad knee sent sharp pain shooting up his thigh with every step, but Daniel did not slow down. He could not slow down. Behind him, he could hear the hunters moving through the garden, their heavy footsteps crushing the delicate plants beneath their feet. The shelter was still far away, too far. Daniel knew he could not outrun them in a straight race. They were faster than him, stronger than him, built for hunting prey across open ground. If he tried to reach the bunker directly, they would catch him before he got halfway there. He needed to be smart. He needed to think. Daniel ducked behind a fallen pillar, one of the garden decorations that had been knocked down by the explosions. He pressed his back against the stone and held the princess close, trying to quiet his own ragged breathing. Was trembling in his arms, but she had stopped making sounds. Some instinct told her to be silent, to hide. Through a gap in the pillar, Daniel could see 3 hunters stalking through the garden. They were even more terrifying up close than the briefings had described. Their scales were dark green, almost black, and their yellow eyes scanned the area with predatory focus. Each of them carried a plasma rifle, and their claws looked sharp enough to cut through bone. They were hunting, and Daniel knew with cold certainty that they were hunting for exactly what he was carrying. A princess would be the ultimate prize for raiders. They could ransom her back to the queendom for enormous wealth, or they could keep her as a trophy, a symbol of their dominance over one of the galaxy's great powers. Either way, Princess was in more danger than almost anyone else on this planet. Daniel looked down at the small creature in his arms. Her compound eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something that transcended species and biology. He saw a child who was scared and alone, who wanted her mother, who did not understand why the sky was on fire and monsters were hunting her. He thought about Sophie. He remembered holding her when she was small, the weight of her in his arms, the smell of her hair, the complete trust in her eyes when she looked up at him. He remembered the fierce, burning certainty that had filled his heart in those moments, the knowledge that he would do anything to protect her, that he would face any danger, fight any enemy, give his own life without hesitation if it meant keeping her safe. That same feeling filled him now, looking at this alien princess. It did not matter that she was not human. It did not matter that she was not his daughter. She was a child and she needed him, and Daniel Cooper was not the kind of man who could walk away from that. "We are going to be okay," he whispered again. "I promise." The hunters moved past the pillar, their attention focused on the deeper parts of the garden. Daniel waited until they were nearly out of sight, then carefully stood and began moving in the opposite direction. The bunker was to the east, but they were coming from the east, their drop pods landing in waves across that part of the garden. Daniel needed to go around, to circle through the northern section and approach the shelter from a different angle. He moved as quietly as he could, staying low, using the plants and fallen debris for cover, clung to him without making a sound, as if she understood that their lives depended on silence. Daniel was grateful for that. He was also grateful that she was so light. His arms were already starting to shake from the effort of carrying her, and they still had a long way to go. The northern garden was darker, the twin suns hidden behind a thick cloud of smoke from the burning buildings. Daniel picked his way through the shadows, his eyes constantly scanning for movement. He could hear fighting in the distance, the crack of plasma weapons, the roar of war cries, the desperate shouts of defenders. He wondered if the queen knew that her daughter was missing. He wondered if anyone was looking for her. A shape moved in the darkness ahead. Daniel froze, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. But it was not a hunter. It was a guard, wounded and crawling toward the shelter. The guard saw Daniel and the princess, and his compound eyes widened with recognition. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. Daniel could see the terrible wound in his chest, the green blood staining the ground beneath him. The guard reached out with one trembling arm, pointing toward the shelter, trying to tell Daniel which way to go. Then his arm fell and he was still. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He did not have time to grieve. He did not have time to be sick. He opened his eyes, noted the direction the guard had pointed, and kept moving. The shelter was closer now, maybe 150 meters. Daniel could see the heavy doors set into the side of a small hill, could see the lights above them flashing in a pattern that meant the bunker was still secure, still accepting refugees. But between him and those doors, a hunting pack had gathered. There were 5 of them spread out in a loose formation, watching the approaches to the shelter. They knew that survivors would try to reach safety. They were waiting, patient as spiders in a web, ready to strike at anyone who came close. Daniel pulled back behind a large tree and tried to think. He could not fight 5. He could not sneak past them while carrying a child. He could not wait for rescue because rescue might never come. He looked around desperately and spotted a fallen beam nearby, part of a garden structure that had collapsed during the attack. It was about a meter long with a jagged, broken end. It was not much of a weapon. Against armor and claws, it was almost nothing. But it was something. Daniel made a decision. It was not a smart decision. It was not a safe decision. But it was the only decision he could make and still live with himself afterward. He shifted to one arm, his muscles screaming in protest, and picked up the beam with his free hand. Then he took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the tree. "Hey," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Over here, you want to hunt. Come and get me." The five turned toward him. For a moment they seemed almost confused. This small, soft creature was challenging them. This prey was calling out to its predators. Then they began to move toward him, and Daniel turned and ran in the opposite direction of the shelter, leading them away. He was buying time. He was giving a chance. He was doing the only thing he could do. He was being a father. The chase lasted 7 minutes, though to Daniel it felt like 7 hours. His legs pumped beneath him, carrying him through the burning garden, over fallen trees and shattered statues. The princess clung to his neck, her small body pressed tight against his chest. Behind them, the five hunters pursued with terrible patience, not running at full speed, content to let their prey exhaust itself. They were playing with him. Daniel knew it. They could have caught him at any moment, but they were enjoying the hunt. That was their nature, their culture, their deepest instinct. The chase was as important to them as the kill. Daniel used their arrogance against them. He ran in a wide circle, heading west first, then curving south, then back toward the east. The hunters followed, spreading out to cut off his escape routes. But Daniel was not trying to escape. He was trying to create an opening, a gap in their formation, a moment when the path to the shelter would be clear. His lungs were on fire. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. His bad knee had gone from painful to numb, which was somehow worse. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, making it hard to see. But he kept running. On his second pass near the shelter, he saw what he was hopping for. They had spread out too far, trying to encircle him. There was a gap between two of them, a narrow corridor of shadows and smoke that led almost directly to the bunker doors. If he was fast enough, if he timed it right, he might be able to reach safety. He adjusted his course and sprinted toward the gap. They realized what he was doing a moment too late. They roared in anger and surged after him, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Daniel could hear them getting closer, could almost feel their hot breath on the back of his neck. The shelter doors were 50 meters away, then 40, then 30. Guards appeared at the entrance, their weapons raised, their compound eyes fixed on the human running toward them with their princess in his arms. They began firing at the pursuing hunters, bright bolts of energy streaking through the smoke-filled air. 20 meters. The first plasma bolt hit Daniel in the back. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was not like being cut or burned. It was like being torn apart from the inside, like every nerve in his body was screaming at once. He stumbled, nearly fell, but somehow kept his feet. His vision went white, then red, then slowly returned to something like normal. 10 meters. He could see the doors opening wider. He could see the guards rushing out to help him. He could see his face looking up at him, her compound eyes reflecting the flames that surrounded them. 5 meters. The second plasma bolt hit his shoulder. This time he could not stay on his feet. The impact spun him around and sent him crashing to the ground. He twisted as he fell, turning his body so that he would take the impact, so that the princess would be protected. They hit the dirt together and tumbled from his arms, rolling toward the open doors of the shelter. A guard grabbed her and pulled her inside. Safe. She was safe. Daniel tried to crawl after her. He could not feel his legs anymore. His arms barely worked. Blood was pooling beneath him, red human blood mixing with the alien soil of 7. He could smell burning flesh and realized it was his own. He made it maybe 2 meters before his strength gave out completely. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was face, looking back at him from the safety of the bunker. Her compound eyes were wet with something that might have been tears. One of her small arms was reaching toward him, as if she could pull him to safety by sheer force of will. Then the doors closed, and Daniel Cooper was alone in the burning garden, dying beneath an alien sky. They did not finish him off. The guards drove them back with a hail of weapons fire, and the hunting pack retreated to seek easier prey elsewhere. The battle for 7 raged on around Daniel's fallen body, explosions and gunfire and screaming filling the night. But Daniel heard none of it. He was far away, drifting in a place of darkness and cold, feeling his life slip away one heartbeat at a time. He thought about Sophie. He hoped she would understand why he had done what he did. He hoped she would be proud of him. He thought about his wife, who had died 5 years ago from a sickness that human medicine could not cure. He wondered if he would see her again, wherever he was going. He thought about the princess, about her frightened eyes and her small arms clinging to his neck. He was glad she was safe. That made the pain bearable. That made the dying worth it. Inside the shelter, chaos reigned. Hundreds of civilians had crowded into the bunker, along with a handful of guards and staff members. Princess was surrounded by protectors, her small body checked for injuries, her royal status confirmed. But the princess would not stop making the keening sound. She would not stop reaching toward the doors. She kept saying something, the same words over and over, and finally one of the guards understood. "The human," he translated for the others. "She keeps saying the human. She wants to know if the human is alive." No one had an answer. They had all seen the ambassador fall. They had all seen the plasma burns on his back and shoulder. No human could survive wounds like that. It was impossible. Word spread through the shelter, and then beyond it. Through the emergency communication networks, through the scattered forces still fighting across the planet, all the way to the command center where Queen was coordinating the defense of her world. A human had saved the princess. A human diplomat, unarmed and untrained, had carried her to safety through a war zone. He had drawn the hunters away. He had taken plasma bolts meant for her child. And now he lay dying in the garden, if he was not dead already. The Queen received the news in silence. Her compound eyes closed for a long moment. Her 4 arms went still. The officers around her exchanged nervous glances, unsure what their monarch was thinking, unsure what she would do. When she opened her eyes again, there was something in them that none of them had ever seen before. "Send a medical team to retrieve the human," she commanded. "Use the royal shuttle. I do not care how dangerous it is. Bring him to me." "Your Majesty," one of her advisors said carefully, "the human is almost certainly dead. Even if he is not, his wounds are beyond our ability to heal. He is not. Our medicine will not work on him." "I did not ask for your opinion," the Queen said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 400 years of rule. "I gave you an order. Bring the human to me. Now." The advisor bowed and hurried away to carry out her command. Queen turned back to the tactical display showing the battle for her world. But her mind was elsewhere, reaching back through centuries of memory, back to ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, back to a power that no monarch had used on an outsider in 6,000 years. The human was dying, perhaps already dead. But Queen was not ready to accept that. Not yet. Not after what he had done for her daughter. Not after what he had shown her about the true nature of humanity. The royal shuttle cut through the smoke-filled sky like a blade. It was the fastest ship in the fleet, normally reserved for evacuating the Queen in times of crisis. Now it carried a medical team on a mission that most of them believed was pointless. They found Daniel Cooper where he had fallen, 20 meters from the shelter doors. His body was broken and burned, his clothing torn and soaked with blood. 2 of the medics were human, part of the diplomatic staff, and they ran to him with desperate hope in their eyes. He was alive, barely. His heartbeat was weak and irregular, his breathing shallow, his skin cold and pale. The plasma burns had done terrible damage to his internal organs. Without immediate treatment, he would be dead within the hour. The medics loaded him onto the shuttle and did what they could during the flight to the palace. They sealed his wounds with emergency bandages. They gave him fluids and medication for the pain. They kept his heart beating through sheer stubbornness and skill. But they knew it was not enough. They knew they were only delaying the inevitable. The battle for Seven was turning. Reinforcements had arrived from neighboring systems, and the raiders were being pushed back. The enemy had underestimated the response time of the Queendom's military. They had expected to strike quickly, take what they wanted, and escape before help could arrive. Instead, they found themselves surrounded, their ships disabled, their hunting packs trapped on a planet that had become a killing ground. Queen received reports of the changing battle even as the royal shuttle landed at the palace. She acknowledged them with brief commands, then turned her attention to the medical facility where the human was being treated. She arrived just as the human doctors were shaking their heads. There were 3 of them, all from the diplomatic staff on Seven. Their leader was a woman named Park, a skilled physician who had treated everything from minor illnesses to serious accidents during her years on the alien world. She looked up when the Queen entered, and her face told the whole story before she said a single word. "Your Majesty," said, her voice thick with grief, "I am sorry, there is nothing more we can do. The damage is too severe. His organs are failing. His nervous system is compromised." She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. "Ambassador Cooper has perhaps an hour left, maybe less." The Queen walked past her without responding. She approached the medical bed where Daniel lay, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with failing hope. His eyes were closed. His face was peaceful, as if he were only sleeping. She studied him for a long moment. This small, fragile creature, this human who had lived barely 50 years, a blink of an eye compared to her own. He had no natural armor, no weapons, no special abilities. By every measure that the galaxy used to judge species, he was weak and insignificant. And yet he had done something that none of the Queen's own guards had done. He had found her daughter alone in the garden, and instead of running to save himself, he had picked her up and carried her to safety. He had faced hunters with nothing but a broken piece of wood. He had taken plasma bolts that were meant for her child. Why he had nothing to gain was not his princess. They were not his people. If he had run to the shelter alone, he would have made it easily. He would be safe right now, unharmed, with his whole life ahead of him. Instead, he had chosen to risk everything for a child he barely knew. The Queen thought about her own children, about the fierce love that burned in her heart for each of them. She understood that love. It was the same for all mothers, across all species, since the beginning of time. The willingness to die for your children was the most natural thing in the universe. But Daniel Cooper was not Not's parent. He was not even her species. What he had done went beyond instinct, beyond biology, beyond anything the Queen had seen in 400 years of life. It was something uniquely human, something that the galaxy had dismissed and overlooked and underestimated, something that the Queen now realized might be the most powerful force in the universe. "Leave us," she commanded. The doctors hesitated. Park stepped forward, concern on her face. "Your Majesty, he needs constant monitoring if his heart stops." "Leave us," the Queen repeated, "now." Something in her voice made the humans obey. They filed out of the room, casting worried glances over their shoulders, until the Queen was alone with the dying man. She stood beside his bed and placed one of her hands on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, weak and uneven, struggling against the darkness that was pulling him down. What she was about to do had not been done for an outsider in 6,000 years. It was the most sacred power of the royal bloodline, passed down from queen to queen since the founding of the queendom. It was called the gift of binding, and it could heal wounds that no medicine could touch, could pull someone back from the very edge of death. But it came with a price. The gift drew on the life force of the one who gave it. To save Daniel Cooper, Queen would have to give him decades of her own life. She would age years in moments. The time she had left would be shortened by a measure she could not predict. And there was more. The binding was not just healing. It was a connection, a link between two souls that could never be broken. Daniel would be tied to her bloodline forever. He would be part of her family, her house, her legacy. The court would be scandalized. The other great powers would question her judgment. Her own advisors would call it madness. The queen did not care. She closed her compound eyes and reached deep inside herself, to the place where the ancient power slept. She felt it stir, felt it rise, felt it flow through her body like liquid light. And then she began to sing. The song of renewal was older than the queendom itself. It was a melody without words, a vibration that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of life. As the queen sang, golden light began to pour from her thorax, flowing through her hand and into Daniel's broken body. The light spread through him like water soaking into dry earth. It found his damaged organs and began to repair them. It found his burned skin and began to regrow it. It found his failing heart and gave it strength, gave it rhythm, gave it purpose. The queen felt herself growing weaker. She felt years slipping away from her, decades of life that she would never experience. The price was higher than she had expected. This human was so badly hurt, had been so close to death, that bringing him back required more than she had anticipated. She did not stop. She could not stop, not until the work was done. Outside the room, the human doctors watched through a window with wide, disbelieving eyes. They saw the golden light. They saw their ambassador's vital signs stabilizing, then improving, then becoming stronger than they had been before the attack. They saw wounds healing before their eyes, burned flesh becoming whole, color returning to pale cheeks. They saw a miracle. When the song finally ended, Queen stumbled back from the bed. She caught herself on a nearby chair, breathing heavily, her exoskeleton suddenly marked with fine lines that had not been there before. She looked older, worn, diminished. But Daniel Cooper was alive. His eyes fluttered open. He took a deep breath, then another, then another. His heart beat strongly, steadily, with no sign of the damage that had nearly killed him. He turned his head and saw the queen standing beside him. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough and confused. "What happened? The princess, is she?" "She is safe," the queen said, "because of you." Daniel tried to sit up, but the queen placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "Rest," she said. "You have been given a great gift, Ambassador Cooper. Your body will need time to adjust." "A gift? I do not understand." The queen smiled, though there was sadness in her compound eyes. "You will. In time you will understand everything." She turned and walked toward the door, moving more slowly than she had before, feeling the weight of her sacrifice with every step. "Your Majesty," Daniel called after her, Why did you save me?" The queen paused at the door. She did not turn around. "Because you saved my daughter," she said. "Because you showed me something I had forgotten. Because humanity deserves a chance to prove itself to the galaxy." She paused. "And because some debts cannot be paid with words or treaties. Some debts can only be paid with life." Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone with the soft beeping of machines and the golden warmth that still pulsed inside his chest. He did not understand what had happened to him, but he knew somehow that everything had changed. He would never be the same again. Daniel Cooper woke to soft light and the sound of wind chimes. He was lying in a bed that felt like woven silk, in a room with high ceilings and windows that looked out over an alien garden. The purple ferns swayed gently in the breeze, untouched by the fires that had burned here 12 days ago. Already, they had begun to heal their wounded world. Daniel sat up slowly, expecting pain. There was none. He looked down at his hands, turned them over, flexed his fingers. They worked perfectly, better than perfectly, actually. He felt stronger than he had in years, more alive, more aware. There was a warmth in his chest that he did not understand. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, a gentle glow that seemed to fill him from the inside out. When he pressed his hand against his chest, he could almost feel it moving beneath his skin. "You are awake." He turned his head and found Queen sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked different than he remembered. There were fine lines around her compound eyes that had not been there before, and her movements seemed slower, more careful. She looked older, though Daniel could not say how he knew that. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough from days of disuse, "the princess is safe and well," the Queen assured him. "She has been asking about you constantly. She calls you her guardian in our language. It is a term of great respect." Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you. I was worried." "You were worried about a child you barely knew, a child of a species not your own, a child whose safety was not your responsibility." The Queen tilted her head, studying him with those ancient, unreadable eyes. "That is precisely why I did what I did, Ambassador Cooper." "What you did?" Daniel looked down at his chest at the place where the warmth pulsed. "What happened to me? I remember the garden, the hunters. I remember getting shot. I remember falling." He paused. "I remember dying." "You were dying," the Queen agreed. "Your human doctors said there was nothing they could do. Your wounds were too severe, your body too damaged. You had perhaps an hour left when I arrived." Daniel waited. He knew there was more. "Among my people," the Queen continued, "there is a gift that only the royal bloodline possesses. We call it the binding. It allows us to share our life force with another, to heal wounds that cannot otherwise be healed, to pull someone back from the very edge of death. You used this gift on me." "I did." "Why?" The Queen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal than Daniel had ever heard it. "I have lived for more than 400 years, Ambassador. I have seen many things. I have met many species. I have watched empires rise and fall, have seen heroes and villains, have witnessed acts of courage and cowardice beyond counting." She paused. "But I have never seen anything like what you did in that garden." Daniel shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the Queen said firmly. "You did not. I have studied your species since you first arrived in our region of space. I have read your history, your literature, your philosophy. I have tried to understand what makes humanity unique, what gives you the strength to survive in a galaxy that considers you weak and insignificant." She leaned forward, and Daniel saw something in her eyes that he had not seen before. It might have been respect. It might have been wonder. It might have been something deeper that he did not have words for. "I found my answer in that garden," she said. "You faced certain death for a child not of your blood, not of your species, not of your world. You did not hesitate. You did not calculate the odds or weigh the costs. You simply acted because protecting the innocent is what humans do. It is written into your very souls." Daniel did not know what to say. He thought about Sophie, about his wife who had died, about all the choices he had made in his life that led him to this moment. "The binding does more than heal," the Queen continued. "It creates a connection between the giver and the receiver. You are linked to my bloodline now, Ambassador Cooper, linked to my house, to my family, to my people. You will live for a very long time, far longer than any normal human, and you will always carry a piece of me inside you." Daniel touched his chest again, feeling the warmth that pulsed there. "How long?" "I do not know exactly. Several hundred years, perhaps. The binding has never been given to a human before. We will discover the limits together." Several hundred years. Daniel tried to imagine it, tried to grasp what it would mean to live that long. He thought about Sophie, about watching her grow old while he stayed young. He thought about seeing generations of his family born and die. He thought about the loneliness of outliving everyone he loved. But he also thought about what he could do with that time, the bridges he could build, the understanding he could create, the future he could help shape for humanity among the stars. "There is something else you should know," the Queen said. When the galaxy learns what happened here, everything will change. A human risked his life to save a princess. The queen of the queendom used her most sacred power to save that human in return. These are not small things. These are the events that reshape history. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the healing garden. The other great powers have always dismissed humanity, she said. They see you as young, as weak, as unimportant. They believe you will fade away, as so many young species have faded before. But I see something different now. I see a species that protects the innocent without thought of reward. I see a species that faces impossible odds and refuses to surrender. I see a species that has something the older races have lost or never had. She turned back to face him. The queendom will stand with humanity from this day forward. We will be your allies, your protectors, your advocates among the stars. When the other powers see that one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy has chosen to embrace humanity, they will be forced to reconsider their dismissal. Daniel finally found his voice. Your Majesty, I am grateful, more grateful than I can say, but I am just one man. I am not a hero, I am not special. I just did what felt right. The Queen smiled, and for the first time, Daniel saw genuine warmth in her alien features. That, Ambassador Cooper, is exactly why you are special. You do not see yourself as extraordinary. You do not believe you did anything remarkable. To you, risking your life for a child was simply the right thing to do. She walked back to his bedside and placed one of her hands on his shoulder. The measure of a species is not in their strength or their technology she said. It is in their hearts, and humanity has the greatest hearts I have encountered in 4 centuries of life. There was a knock at the door, and a small figure rushed into the room before anyone could stop her. Princess ran to Daniel's bed and climbed up onto it, wrapping her small arms around him in a gesture that needed no translation. Guardian, she said in her own language, a word that Daniel somehow understood now, as if the binding had given him a connection to that went beyond translation. You are awake. I was so worried. Daniel hugged her back, careful of her delicate exoskeleton, feeling tears forming in his eyes. I am okay, he said. I am okay, little one. We are both okay. The Queen watched them with something like pride in her eyes. A human and embracing like family. This was what the future could look like. This was what the galaxy could become if only it had the courage to try. The age of humanity among the stars has truly begun, she said softly, and I think the galaxy is not ready for what is coming. Daniel looked up at her, the princess still clinging to his chest, the warmth of the binding pulsing in his heart. No, he agreed, they are not, but we will show them together. Outside the window, the twin suns of 7 were rising over the healing garden. Somewhere in the palace, diplomats were drafting new treaties. Somewhere in space, ships were escorting the first human convoy to enter Queendom space under full protection. Somewhere on Earth, Sophie Cooper was receiving a message that would change her life forever, telling her that her father had become something more than human. The story was just beginning. And humanity, as always, would face whatever came next with courage, with determination, and with the simple, stubborn belief that protecting the innocent was always worth the price. Even if that price was everything.